Hey everyone, Tyler from Quixel here. In this video, I'll be showing you how to work with Megascan's assets inside Blender. Step by step, we'll be going through the Blender integration process so we can export an asset from Bridge into Blender within seconds. Then we'll import a retextured version of that asset from Mixer, and lastly, we'll set up our lighting within Blender's Eevee real-time engine for our final result. So let's jump right into it and get started. So our first step is to make sure that the Blender integration is all set up, and to do that we have to start right here within Quixel Bridge. I'm going to navigate to an asset that I've already previously downloaded right here in my local library. And today we're going to be using this wooden ammo box. So let's click this, and the download settings that we're going to use today is just a 4K asset, and the only textures we're going to be using is the albedo, normal, and the roughness. So once you have an asset downloaded, we then need to go to the export tab settings. And right here, you'll see the export to. This is where we're going to specify the engine that we want to export to. So let's click this drop down menu here and just ensure that Blender is the engine that we're wanting to export to. And if you don't have Blender already installed, you'll see this download plugin icon right here. Just make sure that you go ahead and click this, and then you'll get a notification that it has installed correctly, and that's pretty much it. If you need further help, don't forget there's this little question icon right here next to our drop-down menu, where if we click this, that's going to give you a text version of the step-by-step process of how to install this Blender plugin. Now, before we decide to export this with the export icon here to Blender, we need to go ahead and make sure that Blender is already open. So let's jump on over to Blender real quick. So at the time of this video, we are running the latest version of Blender, which is 2.82a, but this process should be pretty similar to all the versions of Blender henceforth. So once you launch a new Blender scene here, you are greeted by a single cube. I'm just going to go ahead and simply delete this by hitting the delete key or X and then enter. And then now we have a completely blank scene. So at this point, let's go ahead and go back to Bridge and export our asset. So now that we're back in Bridge, all that we have to do is simply click on the export icon here in the bottom right. And you can see right here in the top right, we've been given a notification that the export process was completed successfully. So let's go ahead and jump right back to Blender. And as you can see here, the asset has imported into Blender successfully just within seconds. But what about taking it a step further and retexturing this crate to something of our own? Let's go ahead and jump on over to Quixel Mixer, where we can recreate a new texture for this crate. So I have Quixel Mixer open here, and as you can see, I've got that original wood crate texture applied right here. So all I'm going to do here to this crate is apply a wooden smart material, and then I'm going to apply a scratched paint texture and just make sure that texture is masked out to apply only to the metal parts of the crate, such as the metal hinges and nails. So currently there are two ways we can export this crate and get that into Blender. First way is the export tab up here to the right. The other way is if we go over here to file, and then we can click on the export to library option. This means that we can export our asset to Quixel Bridge, where we can then organize this asset in our own custom library. But right now, exporting a 3D asset to Bridge is currently under development, so stay tuned for a later date when that feature is enabled. So for the purpose of this tutorial, we're just going to make sure that we stick with the export tab. And then we have some options how we can further customize our export process. We're just going to ensure that the export resolution is 4K, and just like the original crate, we're going to only specify just a few textures here to use. We're going to use the albedo, we're going to uncheck diffuse, specular, gloss, we're going to keep roughness, keep our normal, we're going to uncheck displacement, uncheck ambient occlusion, and in this case, we're going to keep our metalness map. That way we can specify where the metal is going to be in the Blender asset. So at this point, once you have your export location set up and all the textures that you want to use, all you have to do now is just click on the export icon here in the bottom. And as you can see, that folder that we've specified to export our custom textures to exported just perfectly right here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to replace the original textures of our crate with these new 4 textures within Blender. So let's hop on over right back to Blender. So here we are right back in Blender, and let's go ahead and replace the textures of this crate with the new textures we made from Mixer. So the first thing that we need to do is hover our mouse in the bottom left or the bottom right of our viewport right here. And if you hover your cursor close enough to the corner, you'll see that it converts itself to a little crosshair. And then once it's a crosshair, all you have to do is click, hold, and drag up, and you'll see that you now change this viewport to 2 viewports. So what we need to do now is change this viewport to our shader editor. And to do that, you need to go up to the top left here and click on this little icon that looks like a ball on a grid. And then move your mouse down and you'll see that it says the shader editor right here. So go ahead and click this. And then once you have the crate selected, you'll be able to see the node structure that showcases the 3 textures of our asset. So all we need to do now is just replace these 3 assets with the new ones from Mixer. Starting with the albedo map, if we want to go ahead and change this one, all we have to do is select this little folder icon right here, and then we just navigate to where the new texture is, select it, hit open image, and now the albedo that we had in Quixel Mixer has simply replaced the old albedo from the original crate texture. Let's go ahead and replace the normal and roughness maps the same exact way. So now we have here the albedo, roughness, and normal maps of the crate that we retextured within Mixer. But real quick, I wanted to show you something that you have to make sure of for the roughness and normal maps. If I were to zoom in here, the color space says sRGB, but we're not using any color data for these maps. The albedo map is really the only texture that will be using a sRGB color space. So to make sure that this is displayed correctly, we need to select this drop-down menu, and then we need to select non-color, and that's going to make sure that our crate is represented correctly in our viewport. Let's do the same thing for the normal map. There we go, we're all set up correctly now. And if you remember, we've actually exported one other texture map, that's the metalness map. And that map is going to help us guide the shader editor to know which parts of the crate are metal or non-metal. So to add a whole new texture altogether, we could either hit Shift A and then go down to texture and then go down to image texture, and that'll bring up a whole new image texture box, just like these other 3. Or we can simply duplicate one of these textures. So I'm going to select the albedo texture, and then I'm going to hit Shift D, and that's going to duplicate this texture. So by duplicating the texture, that's just going to help us search for the new image much faster because it's going to go to the same folder that the albedo is located in. So since we're right here, let's go ahead and select the metalness map and click open image. Again, make sure that this map is set to non-color, and then just simply drag the color output of this node into the metallic input of the principled shader here on the right. And now we have the crate here in this top viewport displaying exactly the way it should be based on how we edited that in Mixer. And now that we have the crate retextured exactly the way we want it, let's go ahead and get our lighting and camera settings set up for the Eevee engine so that we can produce a final rendering. Now, before we get our lighting and rendering settings set up, I want to go ahead and make sure that our camera is positioned in the correct location. If you take your cursor and you click the little camera icon right here in the top right, or if you hit 0 on the number pad as the shortcut is telling you there, it'll zoom to the view of the camera, which is shown by the bounds of this shaded area. Right now, our camera is pretty far away from the asset, and if you try to move around, you can't really move the camera around without selecting it first and then going through the process of moving it in an arbitrary location. But let's go ahead and show you how to reposition the camera the easiest way. Let's go ahead and open the camera again. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press N on the keyboard. And that's just going to pop out this little sub properties menu here. So within this little menu, let's go ahead and click on the view tab here. And then right down under the view look area, there is this option that says lock camera to view. Let's go ahead and click this. And then while we're within the camera, if we were to zoom around, you can see that the camera is being locked to our position, and we can actually reposition the camera anywhere in the viewport without the worry of it deselecting itself like it normally would. So I'm just going to go ahead and reposition the crate to somewhere that we like. Now that we have our camera set up, let's go ahead and adjust our engine settings. If you are familiar with the Eevee engine, then you'll know it's a labor of love to get the lighting and shadows just right. So to start out with our engine settings, we need to go over here and click the render tab, which looks like the back of a camera icon right here. And then you'll see right up here at the very top, we've got the Eevee engine selected. The sampling options here basically adjusts your quality between what you see here in the viewport and what you see when you render. I'm just going to increase the viewport to something around 32. That way we can bump up the quality just a tad in our viewport. And then going down this list, we'll want to make sure that ambient occlusion is selected. We want to then make sure that screen space reflections is definitely selected. If we were to have screen space reflections turned off, you can see that it doesn't look quite realistic right here with the reflective properties that should be on our hinge. But selecting it back, you can see that those reflections are jumping right back the way they should be. And the last setting that we're going to adjust here is the shadows. So if we were to go ahead and drop down this menu here, we need to make sure that soft shadows are enabled in this case, and that's going to allow our lamps to somewhat act like a dynamic lamp. And then I want to make sure that the high bit depth is also selected so that our shadow quality from the light values to the dark values has a much higher gradient that it can work with. So it just makes sure that the shadows are a bit smoother. And the last thing I want to do here is adjust our cube size from 512 pixels to somewhere around 1024 pixels. This is just going to bump up the resolution of the shadow quality. Next, let's go ahead and get our lamp settings all set up. If we were to go ahead and just zoom out here, we can see that really far in the distance right here is our very first lamp. Once the lamp is selected, we can go over here to the properties panel where the green icon of the lamp is. Select that, and right here is our light options. We have point light, which is what the default is. We have a sun lamp, we have a spotlight, and we have an area lamp. And the area lamp is going to be the lamp that we want to use in this case. And here we can change the color of the lamp to be anything that we want. So let's zoom back into our asset here. And if we were to change this color, you can see that we can basically get some really wild effects. But I'm just going to keep this at the pure white. So I'm going to right click on the color and then go down to reset default value. And that's just going to bump that lamp right back to its original color. And then here we can set the power, which is the strength of the lamp, as well as the shape of the lamp. And we're going to make sure that the shape is based off a square. One thing to note is whenever we zoom back out to this lamp, that since we specified that it's a square, we have these nice little transform nodes here that can basically change the shape dynamically of this lamp. So if it's a large lamp here, that's going to produce more soft shadows on our crate. If it's a really small lamp, it's going to produce sharp shadows. But one neat trick I want to show you is to make sure that this lamp is always pointing to the center of our asset. So the quickest way to do that is set up a constraint for this lamp. So with the lamp selected, I'm going to go over here and select the tab that's right above the lamp icon. So if we click the open constraint properties, so then what we need to do is specify what kind of constraint that we want. So we can click this little drop down menu here, and basically we're wanting this lamp to always track the center position of our crate. So with that in mind, we can go down here to this track to option. And then now we need to choose a target. So if we select this empty void, we can then select the asset wood container here. So now we need to specify the orientation of the lamp to snap to the crate. And that's what these settings where to and up are going to be specified. So we need to specify that it's -Z because that's the direction down of a lamp. And then the up angle here needs to be something that is either X or Y. It just can't be the same angle as the to version. So I'm just going to select X. Now, if we were to press G and then move our lamp around, you can see that it is always going to be pointing directly to our crate's center point. So now I'm going to reposition this light to be somewhere right here behind the camera. And as you can see here, I have repositioned this lamp to be right behind and just above the camera. Now that we have this lamp in position, let's go ahead and adjust our lamp settings, as this is a pretty powerful lamp. We're going to drop the power from 1500 watts down to somewhere around 50. And the next thing I want to do is adjust the size. We can adjust the size again by clicking on these transform nodes that's on the lamp itself, or we can adjust the size based on the size option here. So I'm going to change this to something really small, such as 0.02. That way it's a really tiny light, and that little tiny light is going to provide our shadows to have a little bit more sharp and crisp edge. But as you can see, we don't have any shadows really showing in our scene. So we have some subtle shadow effects here because we have the shadow option here of the lamp itself checked on. Let's go ahead and click on the drop down menu, and then let's go ahead and make sure that contact shadows are enabled. That's going to basically allow the mesh to cast its own shadows. In the shadow section right here is where the labor of love for Eevee Engine comes in play. Each of these settings can change quite drastically between lamp and between setting to setting. And if you don't know what each one of these settings are, if we were to hover over this bias here, for example, it's going to give us a little briefing on exactly what this does. So bias says that it's for reducing self-shadowing. So if we were to decrease this all the way down to its lowest value, you can see that the edge of that shadow has softened up ever so slightly. Same thing for the contact shadows. We can adjust the distance of it, which based on this description is the distance at which to search for a screen space occluder, which basically are all these mesh overhangs, the hinge overhang here, and that distance is just the bounds of what that shadow is looking for. The bias, again, is the self-shadowing threshold, and for the thickness, you can basically look at this as the intensity or darkness of that shadow. So for the contact shadows, since this is a very small asset, I want to make sure that the bias is extremely small here. So I'm just going to lower this to its lowest value, which is 0.001. That way I can have the most pristine shadows projected from our mesh. And the distance and the thickness defaults here for this lamp are just fine. And now that we have our very first lamp set up, let's go ahead and add 2 more lamps so that we can create a 3-point lighting setup. That way our asset shines just a little bit more. So to get another lamp in the scene, we can go about it a couple different ways. We can click Shift A, and then we can go down here to the light option and then go ahead and click an area lamp. But we're not going to do that in this case because we want the quicker method. So let's zoom out here and let's make sure that our first lamp is selected. And all we're going to do is we're going to hit Shift D. That way we can duplicate this lamp and make sure that the constraint properties that we set up in the very beginning are applied to our new lamp. So for this lamp, I'm going to use it as the fill lamp, which is basically going to brighten up our shaded areas just a tad. So I'm actually going to position this in the bottom left over here of our asset. And with the second lamp in position, you can see that it is down here off axis to the first lamp and kind of below where the asset is. And basically, again, I'm just wanting this lamp to kind of shine some light up here in our shaded area just ever so slightly to brighten it up overall. But this second lamp is a little bit too strong and a little bit too small because we want the second lamp to be more of a soft shadow effect. So the first thing I'm going to do with the second lamp selected is increase its size to something around 0.2 meters. And the only other thing I want to do here with our second lamp is make sure that it isn't quite as powerful as our first lamp. So we're just going to drop the power down to say around 30. And then let's go ahead and click our camera icon here to see what it's looking like. And the last lamp that we're going to apply is the rim light. And that light's going to come back here somewhere behind the asset. That way we can add some highlights to the back side of our crate and make sure that these hinges back here shine just a little bit more. So again, we're going to zoom out here. We're going to make sure the second lamp this time is selected. We're going to hit Shift D, and then that is going to duplicate the third lamp. So I'm just going to move this into some position way back here. So I'm just going to hit G to move. And there you go. We have the third and final lamp here in the back positioned exactly where we want. There you have it, everyone. We have completed our 3-point lighting setup and we adjusted those lamps to fit the detail that's needed in order to create a rendering for this asset. So speaking of rendering, let's go ahead and adjust some settings so that we can go ahead and render this image. The first thing that I want to do personally is change the color of this background here because the color of the background actually affects the overall lighting of our asset. So we can do that by going and clicking on this little world icon right here, and that's going to be our world properties. And then we can change the color to be any color we want. And then let's go ahead and just darken up our color background ever so slightly here. There we go, that should do it. And then the next thing I want to do is go ahead and click on this little icon right here that looks like a printer. This is going to be our output properties. And right here at the top is the resolution that specifies the resolution of the image that we're going to produce on our output. We can specify the output type right down here in the format. So at this point, all we have to do now is just render the image. We can do that by hitting F12, or we can do that by going up here to our render tab at the top. And then we can see right here, it says render image. So if we go ahead and click this, And just within a few seconds, we see our final image rendered right here. And there you have it, everyone. We have a pretty convincing rendering of an asset that we downloaded from the Megascans library within Bridge, exported a retextured version of that asset from Mixer, and edited the scene around that asset in Blender's Eevee engine to produce a promising outcome just within minutes. So I hope you've enjoyed this video of Blender and the Megascans ecosystem and how easy it is to get set up and running with these free professional tools to aid your creativity. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.